Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the ILV panel, Beyond Ideological Mandates in Social Work Education. We have our special guests here today, Naomi Farber and Vicki Lenz. A reminder to those watching and those listening, if you'd like to interact with our panelists, please feel free to chime in on X or on YouTube. The quick abstract for this panel is that this is a discussion aiming to critically examine the current state of social work education, exploring whether ideological mandates have undermined the profession's commitment to viewpoint diversity, academic freedom, and evidence-based practice. Drawing on perspectives from educators and practitioners, this session will address concerns about the adoption of critical theories that may narrow pedagogical approaches, inhibit intellectual exploration, and potentially compromise client-centered care as the lawnmower goes off outside. So I do apologize for that. Panelists will discuss the tension between advancing social justice goals and maintaining professional integrity while proposing frameworks that balance advocacy with respect for diverse worldviews, political perspectives, and clinical approaches in social work education to better prepare practitioners for effective service across varied communities. I'll go ahead and introduce our esteemed panelists. Vicki Lenz. Dr. Vicki Lenz is currently a professor at the Silverman School of Social Work at Hunter College, City University of New York, where she teaches social policy. She has dual degrees in both social work and law. Prior to receiving her PhD, Dr. Lenz worked as a legal aid lawyer, providing legal services to low-income people. She also served as an assistant attorney general under New York State Attorney General Robert Abrams. Dr. Lenz's scholarly work focuses on poverty and socio-legal studies, including how legal and administrative systems from government bureaucracies to street-level courts and to the Supreme Court can reinforce class, gender, and racial inequalities. She is the author of Poor Justice, How the Poor Fare in the Courts. Dr. Lenz is currently the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Teaching and Social Work. She is also a senior faculty fellow at Hunter College's Academic Center for Excellence in Research and Teaching, where she has presented on various topics, including fostering critical thinking and civic engagement skills in the classroom. That's Dr. Vicki Lenz. Dr. Naomi Farber, who joined the University of South Carolina's College of Social Work in 1998 as a faculty and MSW program coordinator after serving at Bryn Mawr College, has established herself as an expert in adolescent pregnancy and HIV/STI prevention. Her research includes NIH-funded studies on HIV/STD prevention, strategies for high-risk youth, and social network approaches for STI assessment. She has authored 2 books on adolescent pregnancy and numerous scholarly articles on topics including prenatal care, HIV/AIDS prevention behaviors, and neighborhood effects on HIV/STI risk among African American adolescents. Her work appears in prestigious journals like Social Service Review and AIDS and Behavior. Currently, Dr. Farber serves as a faculty affiliate of the Institute for Families and Society, a member of the Research Consortium on Children and Families, and a board member of the Foster Care Review Board of South Carolina. She holds an MSW from the University of Michigan and a PhD from the University of Chicago. Welcome to Dr. Farber as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're really honored to have you here. Myself, I've been looking forward to this panel, and it's such an honor to have you here because of the fact that it follows the special issue beyond ideological mandates and social work, and how important this topic is. So, really honored to have you here. So we'll get started with the question again. Those who are listening, those who are watching, if you want to interact with our panelists, please chime in on YouTube or on X. And so I'll ask Dr. Lenz, what brought about the Journal of Teaching and Social Work special issue, Beyond Ideological Mandates, Critical Reflections on Anti-Racist and Anti-Oppressive Social Work Education?
So the immediate trigger for it was the October 7th massacre and the reaction to students and faculty, where there was one view of it and no search for knowledge about it or understanding about it. And so I've been the editor for a couple of months at that time, and I had read an article by Farber and Fram that called out in social work. It called out what was happening on campuses and what that represented in terms of how we were educating our students. So I reached out to Naomi and Mariah Fram to talk to them about it, to get some support for understanding what was happening in my own university. And that's how the special issue started. We started talking, and it was a long conversation that continues to this day.
Nice.
And the idea of a special issue came from those conversations. But I think that there was also a longer trigger to it. As you indicated, when you describe the kind of work I do, it's the kind of work that is very valued in social work. It's anti-racist work, to use that label. And I began to realize over time that it was being distorted in a way that I was uncomfortable with, that something had changed. And I initially distanced myself from it, continued with my work, and said, well, I can still do this good kind of work and this good kind of research. And I don't need to go to all of these, workshops on white privilege, because I've been doing this work for, oh my God, close to 40 years. But then I realized that something was happening that was preventing that kind of work, or giving it the kind of effort that it requires, and that there was a lot of distraction going on in terms of what people were focusing on. And so putting the two together, I thought, oh, this is a time for change, especially after EPAS. It's coming up in 2025. EPAS is our accreditation standards. Is saying that we have to teach a certain approach, and that's part of our curriculum, part of our readings. I started noticing as editor of the journal that a lot of the articles weren't focused on social change. They were focused on this sort of expressive way and introspection that I didn't think would lead to social change, and which often left out poverty. So I think that was a really long explanation, so I'll stop here.
Yeah.
No, that's perfectly fine. Yes, Dr. Farber?
Yeah, no, I just want to say, and I will say this as many times as possible, I think Vicki's willingness to really step forward and edit this special issue was remarkable, because it has not been a fertile and open world for the kinds of questions that she has allowed us to raise. So I think it's very important, and I think Vicki deserves really tremendous credit for that. Thank you. I will keep saying that.
Thank you. It's all you. I attribute you with my sparks, though.
Okay, but really, it's you anyway.
Yeah, it's been a long time coming, and both of you have written extensively on this. Dr. Farber, I share your article about the dystopian world of social work, education, social work, with everyone I can. And it's so powerful that social work, which is a profession built on challenging the norms and advocating for the marginalized.
Yeah.
We don't often talk about the ideologically marginalized, and so you've been brave and bold enough to do that here. So we appreciate you so much for it.
Well, I appreciate that. It's gotten, I think, I think social work certainly has a long history of sort of particular political leanings, of course, in terms of, valuing social change. Nevertheless, that the lens has gotten much narrower in that regard. And so when I started my studies many decades ago, it was, questions that probably are very familiar to Vicki. But there was a possibility of reading various people with various points of view, looking at different sort of empirical bases for developing policy. And even though there was a preference for certain points of view, we were allowed to and encouraged to explore different points of view, always looking for a kind of empirical basis for that. And that seems to have kind of receded some. So that was a great concern and remains a great concern to me. The way it really dovetails, I think, with Vicki's experience in that way.
Yeah, I think one of the other things that I noticed is that what was changing in the social work profession was a sort of rigidity about things.
Yeah.
I mean, we were always concerned with social justice and social change. But what I noticed happening is a separation among groups rather than a coming together.
Yes.
And that an unwillingness to learn from the past, and in some ways to distort that past. And the conversations became very restrictive. You knew that you could say some things, but not other things. And I think that I'd always thought of academic life. I was an attorney for quite a few years before I entered academic life. And I thought academic life was where you asked the big questions and got all the different views. And more I was seeing that that wasn't the case, that language was policed in ways that you couldn't express yourself, that there wasn't a real dialogue, although the word dialogue is often used. But I think that it was in some ways very circumscribed dialogue. So I think also it was just my image of academia, and we're here to think about these problems in a way that you can't when you're in the middle of the action. And so that was disappointing also.
Yeah. And the methods of that kind of policing, I think, have increased and gotten tighter and tighter. And that's some of the things that really caused me to think about those in the dystopia piece, is to sort of look at what are the ways that we are policing ourselves. And they are many, and they are very effective, which is why I'm so grateful to Vicki, and then also to you, Nafis, for sort of trying to push back on that and open those doors that we desperately need.
Yeah, there's been a good amount of self-censorship that's been going on lately, where we'll police ourselves, and that internalized closing down of conversations. So dialogue doesn't. Sometimes internal dialogue is blocked too.
Yes. Well, the first time that I tried to publish something in a major sociology journal from my dissertation, and one of the reviewer said, "Well, it's really, really good research, but I don't like the implication."
Huh.
I thought, well, if it's good research, that's kind of the answer for whether or not it should be disseminated.
Yeah.
And at that point, the editor, bowed to that. And I knew that things were kind of changing a bit. And that was in the 80s. And I thought, wow, this is a sort of bellwether. Yeah, this is not good.
So if the peer review process, and this isn't part of the questions, we can certainly, if the peer review process serves as a moralistic gatekeeper to, of what are moral facts and what are immoral facts, I wonder how many facts we don't know about because they have been deemed immoral, yet they would still be valuable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
And what's also, as an editor of the journal, I've learned a lot. There's a feedback loop that happens, so that if the reviewer agrees with your political stance, you're more likely, your ideological stance, you're more likely to get a better review. Yeah. And as I now get different types of manuscripts on the topics that I've been involved in, I'm like, who do I send this to? Do I send this to someone who supports this or who questions it? Do I do it to both? Because it doesn't seem to be an honest conversation. It's a prescribed conversation. You sort of know what people are going to say. So that's another thing to sort of struggle with. It's this idea of diversity in the classroom, and I mean diversity, pluralism, and thoughts, but also in our journals and how we review them.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's hard to know what to do. I mean, that's why, Vicki, without someone like you, and there are not many people really who are willing to take your stance, I would say, honestly, over the years, it's been more difficult to find outlets, that are willing really to evaluate the quality, of whether it's the data, the analysis, the argument based on the data and the theories, and even what is considered acceptable theory has been, has been foreshortened. So I would imagine, Vicki, when you look at your manuscripts, it is not, you don't get a lot of psychoanalytic interpretations of behavior, right? Because it's foreboding. Now that's a long time coming. That's not just a recent thing, but it's sort of an example. And that certainly filters down to teaching and to practice, very clearly.
I think what I've also seen, and there's another thing I'm sort of struggling with, I came to academia as an advocate. I mean, I was a legal aid attorney, right? So I was an advocate. But what I'm seeing now is professors that in the classroom were more activists than teachers. that they have a particular point of view and they want to teach their students that. And it's a form of activism as opposed to learning. And that's another thing that sort of initiated all of this for me. It's that I would see syllabi as like the chair of the policy committee at my school that were completely ideological. They were based on a particular ideological premise, not this sort of open inquiry. And it was accepted as the way to do a syllabus. Like, how could we not teach this way? So I think that's another thing that even before what happened with October 7th and what that triggered in the students made me question what we were teaching our students.
Yeah. And it's interesting, you talk about looking at the syllabi. I have seen, as I've talked to some colleagues about these issues, and I don't have a lot of colleagues who are comfortable talking about these things, sometimes people, I think, confuse the term ideology with theory. And so they think that they're teaching theory, which is an explanation, right? And I say, but really an ideology is a sort of total and totalizing perspective on human behavior that is meant to explain much more actually than a theory is. But so there's something has happened, I think, with the sort of analytic capacity to sort of make those nuanced distinctions. And so over the last generation or two, maybe in doctoral education, it's sort of making its way through many things, many ways.
Well, when I was getting my master's, I was asked to align with a particular ideological perspective to get the best grades possible. Same kind of thing during my doctorate, at least early on in my doctorate. And then as an assistant professor, it was like, well, you have associate professor to look forward to. As an associate professor now, you have full professor to look forward to. As a full professor, I'm sure there'll be something else to look forward to. The reason why I tell you this is to get to a question that I have, which is how the two of you, Dr. Farber, Dr. Lenz, how would our listeners and our viewers adopt the kind of bravery that you both have displayed? Because this wasn't easy. I mean, we could certainly joke about it. I'm sure, we have in the past, we will in the future, about like, it's something that needed to be done, and I was just there to do it. And I do the same things too with some of the things that I publish. But it took a good amount of bravery to say, these are the facts, and they may be seen as inappropriate, but they're still the facts and they need to be shared. I'm curious to learn, where does your bravery come from?
Well, I don't know. I mean, probably it comes from my parents, to tell you the truth. I mean, it sort of comes from, in a way, and I do sort of joke about this, sort of Jewish background of questioning. I mean, really, I was raised to question. Now that doesn't account necessarily for questioning and then being willing to take the consequences. But yes, so that's kind of where it started. But I would say I was really lucky in my graduate education. I went to the University of Chicago that was just alive with conflict. And it was really productive conflict. I mean, I had, when I was at SSA, now it's the Crown School, but it was the School of Social Service Administration. It was the people who were at the forefront of behaviorism and psychodynamic case. Just all kinds of theories, and they were unafraid to speak to each other. And so I had a model that I think I was very fortunate to have. And then my mentor outside of the School of Social Service Administration was the sociologist William Julius Wilson, who had himself really put himself in the firing line in talking about the relative power of class over race in looking at poverty and certain kinds of outcomes among African Americans in the inner city. And he once said to me, he had invited me as a student to be someone responding to Larry Mead, who, that's someone you're not allowed to talk about, obviously, second only to, Charles Murray, but close behind him. So he had asked me to give a response to Mead at a public, forum. And of course, most people there were not going to be sympathetic to him, but he looked at me in the eye and he said, just remember, you never argue ideologically, you argue with facts. And so if you have something to say about the integrity of the data or the analysis, that's what you argue on. You don't argue on ideology. That's not an argument. So again, I think I was lucky. I was fortunate to see in action, people at that time who were willing, to have some more integrity intellectually.
Awesome. Dr. Lenz, where did your bravery come from?
Well, so my background is law, and I worked at Lee Layden as an assistant attorney general doing public advocacy. And I, like most lawyers, are used to conflict. And as long as it's not about me personally, I'm great with conflict. I'm not afraid of it. I couldn't do it for myself, but I could do it for other people. So the idea of challenging something comes natural to me that I'm uncomfortable with. And I think the other piece that motivates me is curiosity, because once I think I know something, I like to hear the other side. One of the things I love about law is the majority and dissent opinions, because I come out thinking one way and then I read the dissent and I go, wait, that's a really good point. And I love that back and forth. And, as I look through, the last several decades of this kind of work, I think about how often have I changed my mind about something as a sign of flexibility and curiosity. And I think that that's where this motivated me. I'm also a full professor. I have nothing to risk. I don't really, this sounds like a sort of strange thing to say. I don't really care about my reputation at this point. And I know that does sound kind of strange. I also felt that I had built up over the years a credibility based on my research. And that if someone wanted to question it, go right ahead. I felt really strongly that what was happening, and this is where the advocacy comes in this sense, was really bad for the profession and for the causes that we care about, whether it's poverty and all the things social work cares about. I really thought it was like coming apart at the seams. So when you see that, you think, well, we have to act. And at first, I just went and did my work and didn't pay much attention to it till I realized how much it had seeped into everything around me, and that it wasn't okay just to go off and do what you want to do or need to do, that you really needed to change something. And I think reading E-Pass really frightened me. And reading, there were several articles in the Journal Teaching for Social Work that were advocating how to comply with E-Pass, to the point of suggesting things like looking at every author and looking at their identity. And that's one of the things that you needed to do, and that you had needed to impose that on your entire school, this sort of counting game based on identity. And I just thought, well, that makes no sense. That's assuming everyone of that particular group thinks the same way. And that's not how you teach. You expose students to all sorts of ideas. And so I think that it was just that sense of, got to change this. That motivated.
I think, Vicki, well, I certainly wouldn't speak for you, but I think one thing, even though we have done different kinds of work, I think part of the sort of source for the courage, if you call it that, is really caring about the profession. It feels like there's so much at stake. It isn't academic, quote unquote. It's really, there's so much at stake. So at that point, it's not really about oneself, but something else.
It's a great way of putting it. It's something larger.
Yeah, it is larger.
And hopefully our listeners and our viewers take from that, they're the areas where they are called to be brave, to understand that, the impact of their actions are larger than just themselves. And that can certainly be a lot of motivation to make that change. I wanted to ask a question from the student perspective here. How could social work programs balance advocacy training of students with teaching evidence-based clinical approaches? Dr. Lenz, do you want to start with that?
Yeah.
That's a really good question, because I taught policy practice for many years. And that's really where you are taking your ideas and advocating for change, right? And so So one of the things we would talk about was the more practical aspect of it. Will you be believed in your research if you're always advocating? Then it will look like you're fitting your research to your advocacy. So we talked about it in that sort of practical way, but I'm still sort of struggling with this because there is this mandate in social work overall to promote well-being, however you define that. It's not like sociology. In law, you have to be a certain kind of lawyer that respects the legal process, and you're an advocate by your definition. But social work from the beginning has in their code of ethics this idea that you do more for people. And so that means advocating. I mean, in some way. So I'm not sure that I've totally reconciled, other than I think that if you want to come up with improving emotional well-being, social well-being, you need lots of ideas. And you need lots of evidence. And so the best way to suggest things to improve in whatever form you do that is to do that kind of intellectual research and that even research. Look at everything that you can. No view is verbatim. And so I think that's how you reconcile it. And you might get results that you don't like. But if that's what's happening, then you need to know that, because the program you're designing might not be a good one. So, yeah.
I mean, that's a really good point, that it might not be a good one. I mean, I always come back to this sort of, I don't know, almost sort of existential philosophical belief that human behavior is so complicated that we probably don't know enough to know that we can predict the impact of our actions. So to me, if you believe that, and I don't know that everyone does, but if you believe that, there's a sort of humbleness in saying, well, gosh, I really have to learn a lot about something in order to say with any kind of integrity, well, let's try this, but it's got to be with modesty, because we really don't know. I mean, I think, and we may think something will happen and it doesn't. And then other things may happen, secondary consequences that we didn't know about, right? That may happen all the time. So I think on top of Vicky's, that I agree with, there is that kind of underpinning philosophically. So, we don't know. We don't know. And that's what the ideological perspective doesn't allow for, is that intellectual modesty. That's, I think, one of the drawbacks of it. It simply assumes that we know, one, what is best, and two, how to make it best. And those are both open questions, I think.
Also, on the side of students, how might social work's code of ethics be interpreted differently across ideological spectrums? Dr. Farber, do you want to take that first?
Yeah, now that's tough in a way. I mean, it is tough, and I do spend a lot of time thinking about that, and have with students. I come back to, and again, it's a philosophical point of view, and it can be argued with, and many people wouldn't agree, that the primacy of the individual is for me the kind of basic value that we hold, and that clearly has been, there are other ways to see it. It's balanced against the collective good. I mean, that's the sort of philosophical issue. But one is that I think that most students come into the profession with a yearning to have some sort of positive impact on individuals and groups, okay, but actual real people. And to me, sort of in terms of teaching practice, and I also teach social theory. I mean, I teach, Marx, and, I teach sort of lots of different things, but I keep coming back to the sort of the value of the individual as the actor, and the integrity of the individual, and some degree of freedom. And I understand that is a contested, that certainly is contested, but I do think that the roots of our profession sort of validate that, and just having sort of looked around the world for a long time, I think that is something that people want. is to have the integrity of the individual sort of honored. And that is, I think, the basic. And then everything else is sort of connected, but to me, that's where I start. And it's a relational focus, between human beings, and then that gets us to the problem with, CRT and other things which draw us away from that. Anyway, that's not a full answer, Nafis, but it's sort of the best I can do at the moment.
No, that makes sense. I mean, it's all a work in progress.
Yeah.
Dr. Lenz, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah. So what I really always appreciated about social work was this blending of the two worlds, the individual world and the person and environment.
Yeah.
I thought that is a brilliant idea. I really appreciate psychologists, psychiatrists, and what they contribute. But there was something about social work and this idea that it's a combination of factors that influence your experiences in life, right? Yeah. And I think that we've sort of lost sight of that, and we've erred on one side rather than the other side. I mean, I think about the different stages where it was psychoanalysts was the way to look at everything, right? And I think we've gone back and forth between the two, and now we're in a place where it's all about the environment, not about the individual. And I also think about, I'm a qualitative researcher, and I interview individual people who are affected by their environment, people on welfare, child welfare, all sorts of things. And their lives are much more complex and nuanced and different from one to the other. To ignore like individual need and individual background and what that individual wants. So I think when you take the combination of the individual and the environment and this idea of human dignity and self-determination, and you put that all together, that's what I love about social work. And that's what I think we're losing. So I think that those things are in the code of ethics, and they've been distorted now by EPAS. And it's not like I'm saying throw out everything. I'm saying listen to it, put it together, and listen to that individual client or individual community, or whatever you need to do, and don't presume you know it. There's a certain kind of humility that you need, you shouldn't be imposing on clients your view of the world. And so I think that was the most troublesome aspect of it. But that we have the basis for it. We've done great things as a social work profession.
Yeah. I mean, we do teach as a sort of fundamental practice tenet, start with a client is, and client self-determination. I mean, that's not easily defined. And I always say to my students, if you actually believe that is a radical position. That is much easier said than acted upon. If you really believe that. Rather than seeing people as somehow a reflection of their position only, or just some sort of puppet in the environment,
Yeah. So. It's we have the words from the NASW, and there is political diversity sort of baked into it. In fact, I think I did a dive into the Code of Ethics, and political matters of diversity are explicitly written there. And I've always wondered about how much of what I'm learning from my professors is the actual text versus the professor's interpretation of that text. And when I teach ethics as well, and the NASW Code of Ethics also explicitly states that the NASW Code of Ethics can't tell you how to apply the Code of Ethics. That seems like a good thing until someone takes that and says, well, I'm going to apply it this way because this is how I interpret it. And political diversity, viewpoint diversity has no place in it. If that's how someone is going to interpret it, then does that not then create an avenue for continued discrepancies, I suppose, between the NASW Code of Ethics and the CSWE EPAS?
Yeah, I will say, and maybe it's a bit of a non sequitur, but I think, and this sort of, Vicki reminds me of this, fortunately, I find I've been very fortunate. I have fabulous students here, and they are much more able to see human beings in a nuanced way, sadly, than much of that
Mhm.
than what they read in the textbooks. And so if I push them and encourage them to use their best capacities to see people as unique individuals in a complex environment, they tend to do rather well. And I think much better than some of, my academic colleagues in the larger world. They do. So that gives me hope.
I also think that one of the things that's missing from social work education is a study on ethics. I taught at Yeshiva, Roswell School of Social Work for a few years, and I taught the ethics class then. And first of all, it excites students in a way when you start talking ethics that is hard to do in some classes. Just give them a dilemma that there's no clear answer, and then ask them their instinct, and then go through ethical frameworks as to thinking it out, different ethical frameworks. So I think that one of the things is missing is that. That we sort of indoctrinate students now in what we think or what certain groups of us think is the right way to view the world. And I think a much better approach would be ethics. A full year of it we did at Yeshiva. Of how do you look at this personal problem? How do you look at this on a macro level? What are the different ways of not just using instinct, but to think it through? What do you need to know? And I think that would be a great improvement.
Well, so in order to address the perceived indoctrination, one of the other things that I worry about is that if you look at a pendulum, the push and pull factors are the most profound when it's in the middle. And so if education is supposed to be aggressively centrist, aggressively moderate, it is truly an aggressive place to be because you have to fight against both push and pull factors. And so I've had students, I've been teaching as an adjunct for about 11 years. 11 years of teaching experience. And some of those, original students of mine have reached out to me and talked about how now that I'm going to be getting my PhD, and one of them just finished, and they're going to be a professor too. They were talking about how this is how we're going to undo this, and I worry that they without naming names, they've seen education to be a leftward indoctrination, and I worry that now the new generation of faculty members might come in rather than being moderate or centrist, aiming for a rightward indoctrination, and two wrongs will never make a right. And so I've had a detailed conversation with some of these students who, have said, "What happened to you?" I was like, "Nothing happened to me. I've always been aggressively moderate, and we refer to a leftward indoctrination or a perceived leftward indoctrination is not a perceived rightward indoctrination." And I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Wow.
Naomi, do you want to go?
No, you go first. I'm curious. I'm thinking, and I'd love to hear you.
So, being left or right puts you in a community of support if you choose one, right? And there's a lot to be said about community. So one of the things that I struggle with as I started to see my left-leaning thoughts crumble around me, and I all through my life I've sort of done this thing where I read from both ends. Like I read left liberal, I read left, right, and I try and find my balance with that. But I think that that's sort of what you're up against, this natural tendency for people to want to be part of the group. And so they tend to sign on to things that they don't fully believe on, or maybe I'm speaking for myself at some points in my life. And one of the things I worried about when I could no longer feel comfortable about my identity as a leftist, because that's how I've identified most of my life, but I don't want to just get subsumed in another group now and another way of thinking. I need to figure this out. And I think that's a struggle everyone goes through. And I also think about young people. I mean, we're teaching young people, and it's so much easier. I mean, when I was a student, I thought Marx was wonderful. I thought I was going to be a Marxist. And I remember telling my younger self, stick with this. You found the answer here. You're 21 years old and now you know about the world.
Right. For those days, Vicki, don't you miss that?
So I try and give my students a little bit of grace when they start acting like that, because I'm sure, well, I had all leftist professors. So I think that's why I love the idea of the heterodox community. And I love the idea of these discussions where you really look at stuff and you try and figure it all out, and you acknowledge that you could be wrong or you can change. I think that's really hard for people. They get stuck on one form of thinking and they cognitively just go for everything that supports that, and they don't open themselves up to other ways of looking at it. And so, I think that's what students, it's an art to try and educate students. Now, sometimes they think they know everything, which I did at that time. But sometimes they're really curious and open, and you've got to sort of spark that.
Yeah. Oh, I completely agree. I mean, both master's and doctoral. It's particularly exciting when you see in doctoral students, because then you know that they're going to be taking that forward. And I always say to them literally on the first day of class, and I teach a lot of primary sources for theory and social and behavioral theory. I say, you know what, if I can get you to the point where you feel confused and you really question what you think, then you've gotten your money's worth. Now, I also think that it is my responsibility to help you look for ways to put it back together in a way so that I don't want to leave you psychotically confused. But the place of confusion is okay, because it just means you've sort of loosened the need, as Vicki, you're talking about, to be of a certain identity. And I thought that's what scholarship was about. It's harder when you're a practicing social worker to say, oh, sure, I'm confused, and wander out in the world and there are vulnerable clients there that you encounter. But at some level, the sort of openness of saying, I don't know, but my job is to try to find a basis.
Yeah.
And then typically I think it maybe one way, maybe another. I don't know. And over life, we change too, right? I mean, one of the things that just shocked me, it was so shocking to me to find that and of course I was raised in a socialist home, for heaven's sake. So, I mean, my poor father would be, mortified. Is that, and so I had, in the late 70s and the 80s, pretty same kind of politically leftist views. But when I started doing research, and discovered that some of and I also do qualitative research and interviewed people and found out things about their lives and how they understood themselves that didn't fit with either my own sort of theoretical background or the political assumptions that I came with. It was a shock. And it began with my dissertation in teen pregnancy in Chicago, when I met young women who had become young mothers, who said, I wish I hadn't had sex. I thought, no, that's wrong. No. What you mean is, I wish I had Planned Parenthood. And then they said, no, I actually wish that I hadn't had sex. And the kind of, it shocked me to my roots, because I was wrong about something that I held so dear, because in my view was very politically based. It wasn't based on any deep understanding of young women or human behavior. It was an assumption. So that really rocked my boat deeply. And it's been rocking ever since, like really complicated, like the idea of work. I mean, just so many things. I mean, the list is endless.
In the classroom environment, we do have a great deal of power to influence future generations. I try to tell my students all the time that if you don't understand your perspective until you understand the credibility and validity of opposing perspectives. Exactly. So if you think you've got it all figured out, it's quite the opposite. To really be an expert in something is to know that not much is known about that topic to begin with. So as educators, since we have the amount of power that we do, how can we create classroom environments where challenging conversations about race, gender, and class can take place without reaching some sort of intellectual conformity at the end?
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Farber, Dr. Lenz?
No, Naomi, go ahead.
I just do it in a relatively straightforward way, which is that I expose students to readings a variety points of view. I mean, for example, I know that in their sort of diversity class, they're going to have a very particular point of view. So in my social theory classes, when we talk about, say, race, I say to them, I have a sort of a pretty clear understanding of what you're coming with, and that's really important. And I don't want you to sort of, ignore that. But there are other ways to understand things. So we're going to read Thomas Sowell, for example. And I have students who are African American who say, oh my God, actually, my family's from the West Indies. The things he's talking about describe me in a way that I had never thought about before. That it isn't all racism. It's not that it doesn't exist, but there are other more additional complex factors that help me understand my experience. And so I sort of do that at every step of the way and say, you are entitled to conclude anything you want. Your only obligation is to establish a basis for it. And then you're on your own, right? And so that's my job, is to sort of expose them to things that I know they're not in the course of their education being exposed to. And they usually find it very exciting, to be honest. I have to say, it's been very rewarding. See that.
Yeah. Dr. Lenz?
So I've experimented with different things with this. Again, because of my legal background, I am naturally predisposed to debates, not necessarily dialogues. In fact, I've been criticized for doing debates instead of dialogues because social work likes to, but I think a good debate can be a great way to add some excitement to the classroom and to get people to walk in someone else's shoes to hear another point of view. But the experience, again, it goes back to community. There's so much uniformity that, I will assign somebody, I take a major Supreme Court decision on marriage equality, on stop and frisk, on really incendiary topics. And I will say, argue the dissent. And they have places to go to read the dissent, because there are dissents often in Supreme Court decisions. But it never fails. If they think that they're arguing the conservative position, they always start their arguments saying with a laugh, I don't really believe this. But social work students, being social work students, then really get into the role. And they really, I've had some of my best classes doing that. And sort of the laughter and sort of the intensity of it breaks some of the tension, because I've given them permission. And then they go like they're an actor or an actress, just go full tilt into the role. But so that's one way I do it, but it still troubles me that they have to disclaim it, because they're in an environment where the community does not accept opposing viewpoints. And initially, I also sell it as something that Naomi said about, you need to know the other side in order to advocate for your side. But I really want them to know the other side to determine whether their side really has some flaws, and they might want to change their mind about something. But the environment is constricting in that way. And so I think that we have to think about pedagogy and how we introduce ideas and all of that to really get true diversity of opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. I think my students in sort of conversations at the moment, and then in course evaluations, I think the thing that they most honestly appreciate is that they feel pushed to explore different points of view, and then they learn more about themselves. And then it brings out the capacity to do what you're talking about, Vicki.
Awesome.
And then there's those students who haven't said anything because they don't agree. There are those students who really do have a different point of view. I used to teach at Columbia, and a lot of the students came from former Soviet Union countries. And they had a whole different view of things. While the students that lived in the United States were trashing the United States in every which way, they brought in, well, we couldn't even walk onto the street and protest, and you're, protesting this. And so, I think that there's that element of it. Again, the environment that we're in, people sort of don't understand the dynamics of it in some ways.
Yeah. And it is hard. I think part of the difficulty, at least that I've seen, is our students, and I would probably speak for all of us, have such a poor historical understanding that, so when, if I teach about Marx, or, and I say, well, let's talk about some of the sort of implementations, let's sort of get beyond the trope. It just was never, applied properly, or, that's the problem with it. And I say, well, it might be. I mean, this is not mine to say, but let's maybe take a look at some of the complexities that occur when you apply certain of the ideas. And then I show them something about the Great Leap Forward in China. I just want to give them like this shock for a moment, and I say that, but but they don't know anything. They don't know any history, unlike at Columbia, maybe because I'm in South Carolina, my students don't know much about the rest of the world. So they don't have a good platform for making sense of that. It seems very distant. And so I sort of take that's sort of my fault, for in a way that I've, sometimes make judgments where they can't quite understand why that's, so what? I mean, so what if there was a famine? If everything is collectivized, well, what does that have to do with, something in my life? So it's hard. And I find it frustrating sometimes, to be honest, to help them be critical of any ideas when they don't have a solid, good liberal arts basis, I have to say.
And I don't know if that's new or not, but I've noticed the same thing. It's sort of an erasure of history.
Yeah.
And that even history, I gave them an assignment where they had to go back and unearth the history with original source documents, so they could see at the time people were saying.
Oh, my goodness.
And one of them went back 20 years. And I'm like, 20 years? Is that history? I'm thinking, like 60, 70, 80 years to really get a sense of how things remain the same and how they've changed and what lessons you can learn. So I don't know if it's something part of our society now where that history gets erased in a way that it didn't before, and a lack of education in it, or in absorbing that education. Yeah. But, so along with sort of when you're in your 20s and you think you know everything, which we all go through, is this lack of history.
Well, and actually, I think now that you're saying that, Vicki, what I'm thinking about your students who thought that 20 years was history, they're probably being taught in their research class, I would venture to guess, that all of their references have to be no older than, 5 years, 10 years, whatever, because whatever came in the past, by definition, is not important. It's not valid. There's nothing to learn from it. And I said, well, just because it's recent doesn't mean that it's more valid. I mean, no, that's not accurate. But they absolutely are taught that. So I think the sort of pedagogic norms are sort of rife, sort of throughout the curriculum. It isn't just in these substantive courses. Yeah, I mean, they're not allowed to cite anything.
Yeah, well, many of the assignments that I have to, assign on my syllabi require students to search for articles only within the last 5 years.
Yeah.
Which gives us a very myopic view of a historical. There's no such thing as historical contact when we can't go back 6 years.
Right.
So that is really interesting.
Now, it's hard for master students. I mean, for doctoral students, I don't have any sympathy. Like, they have to go back. But for master students, it's hard. I mean, it is hard for them to do that. But I think Nafis, probably that is, and so it's just they think, okay, there's some meaning to that, to this assignment's parameters.
Yes. So a couple of personalized questions here. First for Dr. Lenz. How might principles, based on drawing from your legal background, how might principles of due process and equal protection inform approaches to viewpoint diversity and social work education?
To me, it's just a natural fit. It's legal language for the process of giving everyone an opportunity to be heard, a certain sense of neutrality, because part of due process is an unbiased judge. So it's judging ideas, but putting aside your bias. And it's also, even though, I talk about debate and advocacy, it's a polite way to disagree. Because we have rules in court about who talks when, and you don't do ad hominem attacks. And there's also this theory of therapeutic jurisprudence, which very much talks about courts that use respect and all the things that we talk about in social work about how to treat an individual, that's what we should do in court also. So in my mind, it's really compatible to this idea of respecting other people and their opinions and learning about other things and getting a full hearing. The idea is, well, the adversarial system is based on the more you have two sides, the more you'll get to the truth somewhere in between, because you have somebody countering you at each move. And so I think this idea of, like Naomi assigning readings that opposed other readings, right, is the same thing that happens in law, like the search for the truth. You know, we can argue about subjective truth, objective truth, all of that, but there is a search for it. And the idea of the respect in the process of letting other people have their due and their opportunity to speak and present their side of the argument for the other person to rebut, and then coming together with it. I think the difference in social work is it's not all wins and losses. I mean, in law, you either win or lose the case based on that process. I think, though, it's a good model for how to respect other people's views, and how to have an argument. I mean, there are arguments. We're arguing over these things. We can't paper that over and say, paper it over and say, no, we all agree here.
Well, thank you for that. Dr. Farber, question for you. Based on your research with diverse populations, how might ideological homogeneity affect service delivery to communities with varied cultural and religious values?
Well, I mean, that's sort of at the end, in a way, what we have to worry about, right, is that how well can we be helpful to other people who, you know, in these complex situations. I mean, it's a big question, but in a way, I have to say it is not entirely unrelated to Vicky's point, which is to say that when you, if you encounter clients, and again, it doesn't matter whether it's an individual, a family, a group, or a community, whatever, if you are unable to give them the possibility, the dignity of a full hearing and try to understand them as they understand themselves, which may often fly in the face of your own preferred assumptions. So if you can't do that, and I think the sort of homogenization of the particular point of view that we're talking about now, but it could be any, then there's no possibility of understanding someone in their own terms. And so the truth that we're after, I mean, there's many different truths, you know, based on theory and, you know, of course, nevertheless, at the end of the day, it's people's understandings of their lives, what they want for their lives, that we are supposed to be there to facilitate. And so I think, again, it really isn't unrelated to Vicky's commitment there to sort of a full hearing. And I worry that students who are told, well, you know, Vicky, you started talking about sort of white guilt, or, you know, sort of certain things which students carry, you know, based on an identitarian point of view, it cuts off the possibility, I think, of a genuine understanding based on the uniqueness of who people are. And that then I don't know what social work does then. Then it becomes very authoritarian to me. That's sort of what I worry about. And we're not supposed to be authoritarian.
No.
I don't. So.
Well, as we come to an end of our conversation here, what's next for the Journal of Teaching and Social Work?
Well, Nafis, you and I can answer that, right?
You can answer that. Tell us.
Nafis, go ahead.
Sure. So we have a special issue, a call for papers out on academic freedom and critical thinking and social work. You know, those who are listening, those who are watching, we encourage you to submit an article for peer review. And that's the next step in this, in building from the wonderful work that has been done in Beyond Ideological Mandates in Social Work Education, and now moving into this special issue where it's myself, Vicki, Dr. Lenz, and Dr. Bruce Dyer, who are going to be co-editors for this special issue. It's exciting, and I can't tell you how honored I am to be part of this process. And you know, just I tell everyone I can about how awesome it is that I get to work with such wonderful people. So that's what's next. Did I miss anything as far as what's next?
No, that's it. That's great.
Yeah.
No, it's very exciting.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's just very exciting. Thank you both.
Yeah. Absolutely. So we look forward to continue to make a difference here. We're making a real positive difference here as far as including viewpoint and political ideas into this space, and we hope more and more people will come join us for these conversations. More and more people will write the way that Dr. Farber, Dr. Lenz has written, and make that sort of difference there. So this has been the ILV panel on Beyond Ideological Mandates in Social Work Education. To our viewers, to our panelists, to our listeners, we really thank you for joining us today. And this will be available for review on YouTube. So anytime you want to look at this, watch this video, you can. It'll be on ILV's YouTube channel. And Dr. Farber, Dr. Lenz, I'll be sure to send the link to you as well once we're done here. Any final thoughts from either of our panelists?
Well, I'm sorry, Vicki, go.
No, you go.
Well, I'm retired as of last week, and so I don't think I'm stepping away necessarily from the work, but from the university, and I just want to say, just on a more personal note, Nafis, that as I move away, that I am grateful for you and your own bravery in carrying these important questions forward, and I don't take that lightly. So I can step away with some more hope than I think I might have had. So thank you for that.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
And I was going to say something very similar. I wanted to thank you for reaching out to us and for supporting us, and to knowing that there were other people out there who felt similarly and would carry the banner of it, so to speak. And it is really helpful, really appreciative of it.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Because we do need a community, Vicki, actually. It is important, right? That we're not alone.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And, we have organizations like Heterodox Social Work, which is continuing to grow here. And I think, part of the thing that we're going to be focused on is to really create a truly inclusive space, and being very cognizant about, not going in a different direction just because we've experienced one direction. Right. Really creating an environment where all these ideas and perspectives are welcome for debate and dialogue. Yeah. So thank you for that, and I'm honored to be in this space that you both have so wonderfully created for folks like us. So thank you again, and thank you to our listeners, and thank you to our viewers.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.